Thanks, Marion. So no pressure then, right? This water safety plan thing is all down to me. I'd like to start with one of those sort of Alcoholics Anonymous beginnings. My name's Jamie, and I enjoy Swiss cheese. And I don't think I can anymore after what I've heard about them today. What I wanted to try and do in the time that we've got here is to reflect back a little on the origins, the rationale, and the fundamentals of what have become known as water safety plans or water safety planning, and recite a little of what I think we've learned from some of the high quality research that's been done on implementation. And I'd like to begin by walking you back to an era which Steve referred to. This is really the 1980s, the very beginning of the 1990s. And much that was being done on drinking water in that era was creating very long lists of chemicals and applying chemical risk assessment approaches to identify safe concentrations. And that dominated regulation, and it really dominated a lot of the science that was going on at that time. The list on the right is the US EPA candidate contaminant list. It's a mere 126 chemicals to worry about, and if you read the cover note, it says that's just the beginning. Book on the left is from some work that I collaborated with OECD on, and at that time, OECD was convinced that we had to take that chemical approach and apply it to microbes. The secret's going to be having faster measures, the microbes on a chip approach, that we will be able to test everything instantly and respond accordingly, was what they were convinced the future looked like. Now, about that time, I had been working for several years in Latin America on improving drinking water safety, and I'd been advising the World Health Organization as an outsider. And I met with a very smart guy called Arie Havelaar, who had been doing similar advisory work from the Netherlands, also to WHO. And we sort of got together rather like partners in crime. And in 1994, when I was recruited by WHO, we decided that we would try and push the organization away from this detect and measure approach and into embracing systematic preventive management. And the first key step on that happened in 1994 when there was a formal adoption of a plan of work that said this was the direction to move in. Now, what followed was about a 10-year journey. It was quite fun a lot of the way. I met some great people from New Zealand and other places. We ended up collaborating with nearly 500 people from nearly 100 countries. Yeah, let's leave that there. And what I've tried to do as part of this presentation is to go back and look at some of the presentations that we made during that process to recover what we were thinking of that time. So not using hindsight, but what actually was being said. So the next few slides come from a slide deck that was used back in 2003. And I've inserted them here. Oops. Now, that's awkward because we've lost the layout. Okay, that's a shame, but that's life. I've inserted them here because they describe the rationale that we really thought was very clear. And the first part was very straightforward. Waterborne illness still happens. Still happened then, it still happens today. We've had Havelock North, and we could recite data from countries like the US where we could break down, as Steve has done in great detail, the underlying causes. So if disease is happening, we should work towards preventing it. Secondly, and we've heard a lot about treatment already today, that sophisticated treatment may be necessary, but it's not sufficient to prevent disease. And we've heard in the last presentation quite a lot about E. coli. Let's remember, in some of these outbreaks, E. coli was not detected. In fact, in many of them, E. coli was not detected. So if you make your decisions on whether you will drink water based on whether there's detectable E. coli sometime in the last few months, you may not make the wisest decisions. And thirdly, that testing at very low frequencies, which we, if honest, is what we do, of a parameter which varies extremely quickly in time, is too little and too late. Because by the time we get that analytical result back, that water has already pumped through distribution and has been consumed. So these were the reasons that we were reciting that we believed a different approach was needed. And during the course of that 10-year journey, we looked at a lot of ingredients that might go into the mix. Sanitary inspection, multiple barriers we've heard a lot about, hazard assessment and critical control point we've heard a lot about. We also looked at things like failure mode analysis. What had been learned from continuous quality improvement? What could we learn from Toyota and the Japanese car industry? Total quality management. Quantified microbial risk assessment was just taking off and maturing at this time, and it came into our thinking. And what came out of that was two things: a framework for safe drinking water and the idea that became known as a water safety plan. The WHO recommendations that emerged from that 10-year journey were actually remarkably simple. And they proposed three key ingredients. One, the national legislation should lay out the responsibilities of the key actors and should establish health-based targets that should be met, part one. Part two was the water safety plan, the means by which a supplier would demonstrate that they were reaching those health-based targets. And third was an independent surveillance function to ensure that suppliers were consistently doing things that should be done in order that the health-based targets were consistently met everywhere. Now that all sounds very straightforward. The 10-year process, why did it take so long to come up with something so simple? It took so long because the heart of this is about consultation and listening to different actors and responding to their concerns. And we heard concerns from all three of those groups, from the legislators, from the suppliers, and from the regulators. What emerged, this water safety plan, as it was understood at that time, first of all, created a difficult challenge for suppliers, and a lot of that 10-year consultation was talking to suppliers about how they couldn't stick inside their comfort zone of treatment, but needed to stretch themselves up into catchment management systems, which required collaboration and agreements with others, not absolute control. And they had to stretch themselves down into the distribution system, where they may have control of their assets, but not of all the things that would influence their assets. So the water safety plan, the plan itself then, was envisaged as something which identifies risks, prioritizes risks, and mitigates them through control measures. We've heard phrases like that throughout the presentation already this morning. It had three key components. First of all, a system assessment, fundamentally asking the question, can the water supply chain deliver safe water? And Jim, thank you for walking us through a very specific version of that just a moment ago. Monitoring, which is not focused on water quality. The monitoring at this point is focused on the control measures. And Jim again spoke about this a few moments ago. This is a big shift in the mentality that we saw at that time. But focusing on the control measures allows us to look at things that we can get rapid responses to. We can look at those alert levels that Jim referred to, and we can take management actions in real timelines instead of detecting shit in water and then worrying what it's been doing to people. That's a big change in mentality. It did not say that testing for E. coli wasn't needed. It's a great verification step. But it moved most of that testing focus onto the control measures themselves. And thirdly, it required that there was clear documentation of the management decisions and the communication actions that would be taken both under normal operating conditions and under extreme events. So you need your response plan. Now, it's always nice to be able to simplify things. So when you're communicating, we really strip this down. It boils down to three things. What are the risks? How do you control the risks? How do you know the risks are under control? And that's a simple, compelling way that we found to relay these ideas. The problem, or the insufficiency in that is that it focuses on a document and a documentation. And if I look at the layout that we described in the manual that accompanied this, yes, it includes components of system assessment, operational monitoring, management and communication, but it does a lot more. It describes a process of water safety planning rather than the content of a water safety plan. So it describes who has to participate if a plan is going to be useful. It talks about validation and verification, and it builds in systematic feedback loops that require that every time there's an incident, and at least annually, there's a review of that plan which leads to change and upgrading. Now, we were quite pleased with this. We thought we were being really smart, and we were not under-ambitious. This comes from another slide that I detected from somewhere in the late 1990s or early 2000s of all the benefits that we thought would accrue from water safety planning. So there's no modesty there. We had great plans for this. And I suppose that leads us to the question, well, does it work? Jim said that he believes that in New Zealand, it has led to improved risk management. I'm going to present some hard data from two pieces of work that we've done. One is in small systems, small suburban systems near Paris and in Spain. And there's actually 7 different sites mixed in here. And you'll see that for a variety of compliance measures, the process of implementation led to improvement. I think there's 2 oddities in there that are in red. And what I would say to you, these feel like the exception that proves the rule, because what we saw there was that there was a short-term decrease in compliance, but the water safety plan process actually picked that up. The operator got upset about it. They went back round, did an improvement, and that would today read as an increase in compliance. Now, that gives me quite a lot of confidence. The second example is from a country that's rather a long way from here, and that's in Iceland. And this was an accident of history. So water safety and planning had been done, and no one had really mapped it out very carefully. And thanks to a mature PhD student who wanted to get her PhD before she retired, she went back to the health authority and said, well, these places we've been doing water safety plans, can I get hold of the data from the health centres? Now, she'd got long periods before and after water safety plans, sometimes 7, 10-year periods. And she could map out for 7 locations the rates of attendance at clinics for diarrheal disease in the before and after periods. Those results are really remarkable. A statistically significant reduction in diarrheal disease in a population that was completely blinded. No one knew that this water safety plan thing was going on at all. This was some weird thing happening inside the water supplies. So that's a statistically significant improvement. So it looks like they work. Water safety plans do work. They increase compliance, and even in a relatively pristine, sorry to use that word, set of water supplies seem to be associated with better health. So how are they being rolled out? Well, if we look globally, it's true. We've heard New Zealand was a very active participant in this process between 1994 and 2004. And that uptake of water safety plans now, this says 92 countries have implemented. That's a bit disingenuous because you don't need to have universal implementation to do that. We think there's somewhere between 40 and 50 countries that require it or where it is very extensively practiced. And in terms of international policy uptake, that's a remarkably fast rate of implementation. So what have we learned if it works? It works in the sense of having the impact we want. What have we learned about how to make it effective? Now, this is quite difficult to work through because there's not that much high quality research that's been done. So what I've tried to do is tease apart my opinions from what I think we can reasonably derive from the literature. And if we break it down into looking at preconditions, actually getting water safety plans developed and implemented and then sustaining them, we can see, I think, a few different things. On the preconditions, it's incredibly frequent that we see failure at a country level. So that's doing the water safety plan and having it on the shelf. And looking for signals of things to learn from. An example I would give of that is previous outbreaks that we've seen, which were not looked at as examples. So, as an outsider looking at the experience in Havelock North, what strikes me is it might be useful to distinguish between having a water safety plan and doing water safety planning. So, a water safety plan can describe risks. In fact, we've heard that this did to some extent. But if the heart of the plan is not being followed by committed staff, we have a weakness. Risks are not understood amongst employees, infrastructure is not maintained, and so on. I'd also distinguish or draw the tension with that framework for safe drinking water, to look at how effectively the legislation described health-based targets and how well it clearly assigned responsibilities. And we've heard about the DWAs and their ability to conduct independent surveillance and advise. Now, when I was preparing this presentation, I got a message saying, Jamie, please talk about sanitation safety plans as well, which wasn't my original intention. But if we look at this rather crude but simple diagram, we have a turd on the left and we have a mouth on the right, and somewhere between the two, some water is carrying things from one to the other. What are the things we can do to prevent that? Well, sanitation safety plans begin with the source of the problem, with human excreta. Whereas water safety plans begin by looking at the exposure. There's a fundamental difference in the sense that sanitation safety plans will be relevant to all different exposures, not only drinking water, but also use of wastewater in agriculture, recreational water, and so on. Whereas water safety plans will be relevant to many different sources of hazard, chemicals, zoonoses, human excreta. The key thing, and this is to echo Steve's words, is the principal concern is human excreta and is microbial hazards. So the sanitation safety plan and the water safety plan meet in the middle where those two things coincide. I think that's my time to stop. Thank you.